Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views right here on Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism. We're going to be shifting gears now and discussing a very, very important topic. The UK, which has long considered Hamas a terrorist organization, and now there seems to be a bold legal challenge that is seeking to overturn that designation. A team of lawyers, scholars, and human rights experts argue that the ban stifles free speech, hampers peace efforts, and perpetuates Britain's controversial legacy in Palestine. But critics warn that lifting the terror label could legitimize violence and endanger regional security. That's what some people seem to think. I disagree. This isn't just a legal debate. I think it's almost a political earthquake that has global implications. Could this case reshape how the world engages with Hamas, and what does it mean for the future of Palestine solidarity movements? And joining me now is Fahad Ansari, Director and Principal Solicitor at Riverway Law, the firm which is leading this landmark legal challenge. Fahad, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time this morning, and looking forward to an insightful conversation.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's something we're trying to do is to have a discussion. And that's really at the heart of this application, is the ability to speak, have conversations.
No, definitely. I want to kickstart the conversation with, the legal challenge and some of its core arguments. Your application argues that Hamas proscription in the UK violates free speech and assembly rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, which the UK is a part of, but also critics say Hamas has a clear history of armed resistance. How do you reconcile this with the claim that banning them is a free speech issue?
So there's no such thing as absolute free speech. There's always going to be issues, and we recognize that. However, if you're going to say that you have to ban an organization and can't even speak about them and whether or not their violence is justified, then under the UK definition of terrorism, all acts of political violence fall under that definition of terrorism. The actions of the Israeli armed forces, the actions of the Ukrainian army, even the actions of the British armed forces. The definition of terrorism is to carry out acts of violence in furtherance of a political, religious, or ideological objective. And all three examples I mentioned fall under that category. Now, it goes without saying that the British government doesn't prescribe or ban all groups involved in political violence. It's a political decision that they decided. What we're saying is, in the UK, it's possible to say, I support the actions of the Israeli army in Gaza. I support, even though they have been ruled to be genocide by not just the International Court of Justice, but numerous scholars across the world, genocide scholars, Holocaust scholars, have equated it to the genocidal violence, the Holocaust. And yet, in this country, I can say I support that without fear of repercussion. Furthermore, as a British citizen, I could even go and participate in acts of genocide with the Israeli army and without fear of any repercussion. On the flip side, if I'm going to be saying even, well, you know what, I think Hamas, what they are doing is a good thing. I don't agree with everything they do, but I do think that they are the legitimate representatives and carrying out a legitimate struggle against occupation. I could be banged up for 14 years for saying something like that, because they're a banned group, and when you're banned, there's certain limitations that come in. South Africa needs no introduction to banning orders and what that means, obviously, with your history. And the South African example is very key in our submissions. We say it's not the first time that you have banned a group on the basis that they're involved in terrorism, and that means that we will have nothing to do with them. You cannot speak about them, because the intention is to isolate them, to dehumanize them, and to make sure there can be no dialogue with them. And what we say is, you tried this in the north of Ireland with the IRA, and ultimately what happened? You sat down with the IRA, and now there's peace in Ireland. You called Nelson Mandela a terrorist for how many years? And yet he's now recognized as one of the most courageous freedom fighters of all time. It just means that if you want to get to an end system, you have two choices here. And this is what we said to the Home Secretary. You can either take a difficult, yes, we recognize it's a difficult decision, but it's a courageous decision in the furtherance of peace, or we can carry on to see children shredded before our eyes, on our cameras and on our screens on a daily basis. That's the choice we're facing.
And I think you make, I think, a very, very important point. We're just having a discussion earlier that, Nelson Mandela was still on the U.S.
Yeah,
terrorist list watch until 2008.
quite.
And I want to touch on those parallels that this case is referencing, those historical parallels with South Africa and also in Ireland. Is there a suggestion that, like the ANC and the Sinn Féin party in Ireland, Hamas could transition from, a terror group, according to the UK, to a legitimate political force? And why was it so important to make those parallels between those two organizations?
Well, I think that to answer the first question, Hamas doesn't need to make a transition because it already is a political force. It has an armed wing, the Izzuddin al-Qassam brigades, which has been on the ban list for over 20 years. Hamas was only prescribed in November 2021, very recently, and in circumstances where we still do not understand the reasoning behind it. Because just 5-6 months before the ban, the UK government, was talking about Hamas, looking forward to working with a unity Hamas Fatah government. There was discussions about whether you should prescribe Hamas, and the official position of the government, well, we recognize there's a distinction between the political and military wings.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happened is you got a very politically compromised Home Secretary in the form of Priti Patel, who's now the Shadow Foreign Secretary. And remember, this is a lady who was previously sacked by Theresa May, the Prime Minister, at the time, for having secret meetings, like unknown to the government of this country. She was secretly meeting Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials in Israel. So she got sacked for this. She's completely compromised. And when she suddenly announced the banning of Hamas, she didn't even do it from within the UK. She did it from the United States at a Heritage Center conference. Nothing had happened in those few months. There's no, for example, a 7th of October type operation. Nothing had happened, but she suddenly changed the course of British politics. Now, the deep state in Britain always likes to keep a dialogue open with political parties who have militant wings. They did it in Ireland. Did it in South Africa. They do it in other places. It's just a policy because it gives them influence. It helps in negotiations. What's happened in the past 4 years is Britain has no longer any influence in Palestine because it's made itself illegal to speak with the other side. And that's why I say that when you're talking about a transition, they don't need to. That transition was already there from the very outset. This is the elected government of Palestine in the last elections, which international observers, including Jimmy Carter, described as free and fair, and representing the democratic will of the Palestinian people. When parties start winning elections, you can't just boycott them. Even Tony Blair, who was instrumental in instigating the international boycott of Hamas following their elections, has now said that that was a mistake and that in retrospect, he shouldn't have done it. It was a missed opportunity, he called it. So all we're saying is, why are we repeating history? Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, she's now in a position, as Tony Blair was, to not make that mistake and to work towards peace. But if she carries on and then later on, after hundreds and thousands, possibly Palestinians are slaughtered, then she's going to say it was a missed opportunity as well. So I think the examples of South Africa and Ireland are very important because in both of those examples, we have a similar parallel where groups were described as beyond the pale. You cannot negotiate with these people. They're dehumanized. People calling for them to be Mandela to be killed, to be hung, like senior British political leaders. And when he died, how many of them came to his funeral and cried crocodile tears? They're from all over the world. It was one of the biggest funerals in history. But with the passage of time, people look back on their crimes and think, well, maybe we were wrong. So I do think that in the skewed atmosphere at the moment, because of British-Israeli complicity for over a century, I think there is this loyalty to their colonial project in the Middle East. However, I think what they need to recognize is Israel is now a failed state. The project has failed. It's a pariah state. Zionism is collapsing. Israel is collapsing. And if Britain is smart, it will now take this historic opportunity to change its previous policy, stop siding with Zionism. And we're in a situation, if you think about it, This country, it's been charged with genocide before the ICJ. It has been labeled an apartheid state by the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Its leaders are indicted war criminals, literally fugitives from the law. Benjamin Netanyahu cannot enter the territory of the United Kingdom, one of his closest allies, because there will be an obligation on the British authorities to arrest him. Just last week, two members of the Labour government party who tried to enter Israel were sent back. It's collapsing. And I think if the British government is intelligent enough, they will foresee that this thing's collapsing and we need to look at the day after at what is going to replace it. And to do that, you need to work with all parties in the conflict.
I want to continue and play devil's advocate here a bit, just, in the interest of that free speech versus national security concern debate. The UK has arrested pro-Palestine activists under anti-terror laws for expressing their support for Hamas. Then the question would be, is your case really about protecting academic debate, or could it also be seen as, to many, legitimizing a group that is still viewed as violent? And also, if Hamas is delisted, that would obviously mean, chanting their slogans or waving their flag would no longer be a crime in the UK. And the response to that would be, where do you draw the line between free speech and incitement also, because the issue is still very, very much polarized in the UK?
Well, I mean, if we're going to have that discussion, well, let's flip the coin a little. Why is it that I can to incite violence against Palestinians in this country? Why can I support Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza without any repercussions? If the law is going to say, well, we ban all free speech where it encourages violence, then really and truly it should apply equally. And that's one of the arguments we make, that you have an impingement on your freedom of speech and it's applied in a discriminatory manner because the government has made a political decision that we are going to support this side in this conflict, which means the other side is not allowed to speak. So we're going to make it a criminal offense to express support for the other side. And the problem is that even the manner in which this is being prosecuted, some people have been arrested for expressing support for the resistance. Now, it is firmly entrenched under international law that people who are occupied, a belligerent occupation, and who are fighting against apartheid and genocide have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to resist. And an illegitimate act of resistance, let's call it an attack on civilians, for example, does not delegitimize the resistance itself. This is very, very clear under international law. So in one sense, it is actually an offense to call for genocide. And it should be an offense to call for genocide in this country. And it should not be an offense to allow people to defend themselves. So when you're asking me, like, I know you're playing devil's advocate, but is it a means of allowing people to support Hamas? Well, our client would say, well, as the democratically elected representatives of the Palestinian people who are facing a genocide, that people should be free to express their support for them. Of course. Just like they do with Ukraine. Just like people are fully supporting and glorifying the Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion, Hamas, our clients, argue that it should be a similar parallel with their situation.
No, definitely. And we've seen just how open and supported that Ukraine campaign was, particularly in the UK. I mean, even in sports circles, you see their flags wherever you go. Just two last questions before I let you go. If Hamas is no longer banned, could the UK government legally engage in direct negotiations with them? And is that part of the long-term goal here? And also, finally, just beyond the legal technicalities, what's the biggest misconception about this case that you'd like to correct?
Okay, so that's two good questions. So once the ban is lifted, which we hope this it will happen after this application, the UK government will be free to legally engage with Hamas, to sit with them, to negotiate with them in a way that the Egyptians, the Qataris, the Americans, and others are already doing. So I think that's it's an important principle, and that's one of the key messages that everybody wants the killing to end. And you can only really do that by engaging both sides. I mean, and that's a key lesson from history. The final question is important because I think we need to correct one clarification because it keeps coming up time and time again: is are we receiving? Who's paying for the application? Are we getting funds from Hamas? Hamas is a sanctioned organization. That means that we can not take any money from them or from any third party to pay for their fees without getting a license from the UK Treasury. That's a very long and cumbersome process. So we decided to opt against it. And instead, we're acting on a pro bono basis. All the lawyers, all the legal team, plus the 20 experts, including your very own John Dugard, who contributed an expert report on Israel's right to exist in the submission, are all acting on a pro bono basis. None of us are getting any payment. And we believe that every client has the right to representation. So it's very, very dangerous to equate a client's views with those of their lawyers, which has been happening in the UK. So I just want to correct that misconception.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Fahad. Thank you so much for joining us. Really a great pleasure chatting to you, and all the best on this case. I think us as South Africans, understand more than anyone just how much of a landmark of a case this is, and ultimately what it will mean for Hamas and for the people of Palestine, essentially. So yeah, all the best, and looking forward to chat to you again in the not so distant future.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
That was
Bye-bye.
Fahad Ansari, Director and Principal Solicitor at Riverway Law. Yeah, I think interesting conversation, one that we are definitely keeping a close eye on, and I think one that will have really great implications. Yes, it's complex. Yes, it's contentious. It's a contentious debate to most, but I think it's a case that goes far beyond legal definitions and goes into the heart of geopolitics, human rights, and also just the general future of Palestine. So yeah, big thank you to Fahad Ansari and his team at Riverway Law. And yeah, we'll be keeping a close eye on this case, and we'll definitely be giving you the latest that comes out of it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be heading back here to Africa, where we'll be having a really interesting conversation about the AU and how they've expelled an Israeli envoy from their session on Rwanda genocide. So yeah, interesting conversations still continuing, and really, really enjoying them. Hope that you are too at home, and you're going to be engaging with us and telling us what you think. What comments do you have about the various topics that we're having on the show today? But we're going to take a quick break now. We'll see you after this.